psychedelic compounds, entheogens, plant medicine, all of these things are basically names for the same thing. But why are there so many of them? And what do they all do? Which one is appropriate at any given time? Is the hype to be believed? We will answer all of those questions and many more. At least I will give my weighted opinion on those things. And just give me one moment to make sure that we're not going to have clipping, because that's been a problem lately. So let me just check here and see. And so I hope everyone's having a wonderful Saturday. I know this is a bit of a weird time for me to stream, but YouTube informed me that Saturdays early afternoon is best, and it's not early afternoon anymore, but I thought I would give it a shot. Plus, there's all kinds of crazy festivities going on in our community right now, and we thought we would go out and look around and see exactly what's happening. All right, it looks like we're good. And so also looks like we had some people with no patience at all because they disappeared already. Hey, why is, okay, there we go. Oh no, is this, hold on guys, what's going on here? Is this the same stream twice? Nope, it's two verticals. Son of a bitch. All right, anyways, doesn't matter, I guess. I haven't been talking much about this because I haven't been thinking much about it. You know, I've had my own personal stuff going on, and for me it seemed like remaining in a place of clarity, not that psychedelics don't offer clarity, but just, you know, just kind of taking a break, even from deep metaphysics, you know, while I sort of let my personal life sort itself out. And so that has changed recently, and I have immersed myself back into the world of plant medicine, partly because of the context. Now I am in the Andes as opposed to the jungle, and there's kind of a different focus here on wachuma, coca, yopo, which I'm actually pretty excited about. I had only ever had wilka because where I live, I would collect the seeds of Adenanthera calabrina, which is the wilka seed. And there's varying reports about this. If you look at just like NCBI chemical reports, they say that there's a lot of bufotenine in the wilka and more 5-MeO in the yopo. And that's not necessarily true. I'm gonna have to test it by experience. I also suspect that from tree to tree and from species to, well, from tree to tree, you know, and season to season probably, the ratios of these compounds probably differ, and that's the reason for the mixed opinions. But basically what happens with wilka and bufotenine becomes 5-MeO-DMT when it's heated, and it is true that you heat the yopo seeds in order to, or the wilka seeds in order to get the red skin to puff, and then you have to break it off, and then you grind them up and mix them with snail shell that has been heated to 900 degrees for an hour in a fire, and then you have to dry it overnight. You guys can watch the video that I made about that, and then it's blown into the nose, right? So apparently during this process, when you get it wet and add calcium, whether it's baking soda or snail shells or whatever, that causes the bufotenine to be converted into a third form of DMT. There's actually like 11 different types of DMT or something in these seeds, but the three that are substantial are 5-MeO, 5-HO, or bufotenine, and NN in small amounts. So there's another type of DMT called 5-O-DMT that is created by this, I don't know if it's decarboxylation, what is that word? I'm not really super big into the chemistry stuff, but basically the calcium converts the bufotenine into a more psychoactive and less toxic version of bufotenine. And that description I read on an analysis of yopo seeds as well. So for the first time, I have quite a large stash of yopo seeds as opposed to wilka, which is also called sebel. And I'll let you guys know what I think the actual composition and distribution is in these things, and more importantly, what the effect is. But the reason I did the stream is that I've noticed lately in a lot of the comments that I have gotten, people ask, you know, what is the application of these plants? You know, what is the difference between San Pedro and ayahuasca? LSD and psilocybin, wilka and yopo, which I just kind of tried to answer to the best of my ability without having any real experience. And it is a really interesting subject, and a lot of the answers are really surprising because a lot of people have this belief that things that are natural are just going to be better, and that's actually not true. In the case of therapeutic applications for PTSD, for example, ketamine probably wins, and that's definitely, actually it was found in nature recently in a mushroom about a year ago. So ketamine is not man-made necessarily, and it does exist in nature, not an analog, but the exact same compound. So MDMA also, is not necessarily natural, but it is an analog of MDA, which is a cluster of drugs, MDMA, DOM, which is definitely not a good idea, STP. It's also called 72-hour methamphetamine LSD hybrid sort of experience. 72 hours after about 48 hours sleep deprivation starts to combine with the effects of the psychedelics, and skip that one. MDA, MDMA, on and on. There's a whole bunch of them, and they are all related to a natural compound that is found in nutmeg, and also one of the MDA cluster drugs, the primary one, MDA, is found in sassafras root. So all of these, and LSD as well, you could say it comes from a mushroom. And while we're talking about natural versus synthetic, I think LSD is actually the most beautiful example because it sort of bridges the natural and synthetic chasm, right? Because in its original form, it was semi-synthetic. So basically, the way it was explained to me by an LSD chemist that I would never go anywhere near and definitely never met or talked to, it's like the chemical skeleton is missing a few bones, and the chemist just fills them in. So it is possible to make totally synthetic LSD if you're a complete gangster and you're a really advanced chemist. But the semi-synthetic version is becoming increasingly rare because the ergot fungus is, like, last time I didn't check, I don't know why I would check ever about something like that. It was about $20,000 an ounce. And, nobody needs an ounce. You need a tiny bit, but still, it's pretty expensive. And so the point is, though, that I think Albert Hofmann's discovery, confirmed that it's a possibility that mankind can collaborate with nature and actually do something that is good. I think I know that LSD is one of the most amazing things that ever happened to this planet. And it's worth bearing in mind that everything does contain its contradiction. So of all the major psychedelics, it is the one that is most predisposed and has been used against us, just as it's like this tremendously powerful opportunity for self-exploration to develop the mind, to actually upgrade the hardware. Earlier when I was saying that LSD is superior to a lot of the natural compounds, what I was specifically addressing is the fact that the neurogenesis and neuroplasticity are enhanced the most by LSD. And so if you're trying to quit smoking or change a habit, any sort of like repatterning, reprogramming activity or goal is actually best facilitated by LSD if you know how to use it properly. And while we're on the subject, I guess I'll give you my best tip for that. A lot of you guys probably heard me talk about this, but I actually dropped a 20-year smoking habit using pranayama and LSD in about 2 hours. And it's really just a matter of getting the dose in the sweet spot so that you're able to think clearly still, but it's still strong enough that you have significant, neurochemical, neurobiological changes occurring, and it's incredibly easy to repattern the mind consciously. And creating ourselves in our own image is literally becoming God of our own world. So the opportunity that is presented by these compounds is obviously tremendously remarkable. I mean, I'm sure you guys know, I'm preaching to the choir, if you look throughout modern history at all the huge advances in physics and science and genetics and computer technology and all these things, you'll almost invariably find LSD looming in the urine test of the person that is the catalyst for these discoveries. So You know, that's the amazing thing about LSD. And at the same token, the problem with LSD is that all of these other compounds, all of these plant compounds seem to have some kind of intelligence of their own, or they put you into communication with some part of your being that you're normally unaware of. It's really difficult to ascertain which thing is happening if you're really being objective about it. While it's true that I've received very highly specific and accurate information from DMT entities and ayahuasca, and I've also experienced telepathy that there's no question about it with ayahuasca. The alkaloids in ayahuasca were actually called telepamine and telepathine for 70 years or something before they changed them to Harmala alkaloids. So, at least the fact that these entities are definitely capable of communicating things to us that we could not possibly know that are accurate is a very good vote in favor of them having some sort of objective existence and reality of their own. On the other hand, wow, not a human? Yeah, you never, you know what, man? I'll stream earlier on the weekends just because you have been there for so long, and it's true that your schedule just does not link up. I can't believe both of these streams are vertical. Why did I do, horizontal, I mean, how did I do that? You're not even supposed to be able to do that. All right, anyways, but, the problem with this sort of objective reality granting these things to ayahuasca and DMT spirits is that, despite the fact that people do encounter a lot of very consistent entities with DMT, in the case of ayahuasca, which, the visions are caused by DMT, more or less, if I've worked with a lot of different indigenous groups here in South America, and I've studied for decades, and they're not consistent. And so that sort of, suggests that there is some subjective element. I actually have a theory about this that is kind of long and technical, and I've talked about it in a lot of other streams, so I'm not gonna really get into it now. But it has to do with the idea that there is a field of consciousness and that these things sort of exist as vague archetypal potentials until the vector with our consciousness is engaged, and then they're given form and symmetry, because what gives consciousness a higher order of functionality is the density of the electromagnetic field, just in the same way that you have a field and then you have a little bunched up bit of the field, and that's a particle, and it has a function. It does stuff, and it's consistent and orderly. We are a macro version of that, and for the exact same reason. So what I'm getting at here, it almost doesn't matter whether it's part of our body or entities and spirits or whatever, except that it's very easy for the belief in spirits and entities to become very, very dangerous and detract from the healing efficacy. And I think people are a little bit too eager to kind of jump on board with whatever they perceive the crowd around them to believe. And there's a lot of pressure on people to just adopt the indigenous viewpoint because it's sort of seen as their medicine, which it isn't, actually. And that might make a lot of people mad to hear, but in the Western mystery tradition, we have had acacia, which contains DMT, and Syrian rue for thousands of years. So this medicine belongs to humanity, and you are absolutely free to make your own interpretations of what is happening and do not feel obligated to adopt other people's worldview. In fact, when I was working with the Shuar, he told me, why would you try to see this from our point of view? Learn your own songs. I only was obligated to learn a couple of their most important icaros, and then the rest is up to you. Do not wash the hands of your master, I was told over and over and over again. So anyways, we're getting away from the point of this and getting into politics, but what I was originally saying before I went on all these other rants is that these plant-based psychedelics seem to have an intelligence of their own. And in the case of ayahuasca, it seems that this entity that is not universally perceived as female, sorry, it just isn't. People, I think it was 500 test subjects were given ayahuasca without any preconception. They didn't know what it is. 51% said that the spirit was female, 50% said, or 49% said that it was male. So this is not some universal thing. In fact, the Quechua in the jungle where we lived said that the vine was male and that the chalipongo was female. So again, that kind of subjective interpretation. But regardless of that, our association with ayahuasca is definitely with the night, with the mystery, with the emotion, with the water, vomiting constantly, and all of this emotional baggage coming unfurled and being released back into the ether to be transmutated into some other type of experience. That is the function of ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is not traditionally used much for healing. That's another crazy misconception. It's not that it doesn't do that. It's not that it's not efficacious at that. It's not that indigenous people, particularly the Quechua in Ecuador and the Shuar, plant mixing is like the real art. It's not so much just learning about the plants. When you go to plant medicine markets in Hawaii, for example, you'll see bottles that are labeled 8 plantas, 11 plantas, 25 plantas, 35 plantas. One of the shamanas that I used to work with served a punta before ayahuasca. It was just a small amount, pretty unusual, but she did it because there were 33 different tree bark extracts in that shot of punta that all served a purpose. And ayahuasca has always been used medicinally in the sense that it is believed to enhance the receptivity of the body, or you could even say the energetic field, to receive the healing from other plants, right? And from a purely pharmacological or biophysical, biochemical point of view, it is a very, very effective at reducing inflammation, which will help you to uptake and process any nutrients, much less medicines. So the point I was getting at, though, is that traditionally ayahuasca really was used more for just getting information, which is what? Masculine. That's a bit odd, right? That somehow, at some point, the perception of what this medicine's fundamental nature is shifted from masculine to feminine. So who did that? How did it happen? Why did it happen? I would say that the collective mind, the universal mind, is what did it. It's not even people. It's the necessity, it's the application of the medicine that is appropriate to the times, right? Because we are coming from this super toxic, traumatizing, insane culture, and so that's what we need from the medicine. In my mind, ayahuasca is kind of like the ultimate adaptogen, in the sense that, contrary to popular belief, right, a lot of people believe that ayahuasca is going to make you a peaceful vegan. You're killing more animals than meat eaters, mostly probably if you're vegan. And then also recent studies have confirmed that plants are probably more sentient than we are, recognize relatives, feel pain, know when they're being eaten. So I don't know. I'm not understanding this movement at all in light of the fact that, like, if plants are more sentient than us, what kind of psychopath would eat one? It's appalling, really. But the point is that none of that is real. What ayahuasca actually does is adapt you to your environment. So, for example, the Shuar, who I learned from, were fierce warriors. They were never defeated by the Inca. They were never defeated by the Ashuar, who were like a related tribe. They never lost a fight. And they wore the shrunken heads of their enemies with their eyes, nose, and mouth sewed up on belts around their waist. They purchased sinsak, which were darts that are used to make people terminally ill, among other things. You didn't have to pay a shaman to become a shaman, but you had to purchase the zitzak from them, and you would purchase those with women. So, this idea that ayahuasca wants to make you a progressive vegan hippie, that it has this agenda, is just completely stupid. It has nothing to do with history. It has nothing to do even with the modern evidence, right? I have seen people experience ego inflations that were beyond anything that I have ever witnessed. And I'm not trying to put down the medicine. I'm not trying to say it's not an extraordinary healer. I'm just saying that we really need to be realistic about what these things are and what they can do and what they really actually are for, So what I'm saying here is that if you're from San Francisco and you make $300,000 a year and you live in a community full of, liberal, gentle, harmless, people, and it is going to serve you to become more of a pacifist and more of a vegan and to put more twigs in your tea and whatever, that's what it's going to do for you, more than likely. But if you are a Shuar person surrounded by people that are constantly doing spearing raids on you, it's going to teach you how to cut heads off and shrink them and, sew the eyes and mouth shut so that you can control actually what it was. And this is, I'm just trying to be realistic about ayahuasca again here. I'm not putting down these cultures or the medicine or anything. This is just the truth. The shrunken heads were not actually to stop the, to trap, they say they sewed the orifices shut in order to trap the soul of the enemy in the head so it couldn't. That's not it. That's not it. They were used to control the labor of the daughters that were stolen from other tribes on spearing raids. So, and this is all according to legend, stuff that ayahuasca taught them to do. So, when people get all hippie and they're like, she just loves all of her creatures, and I mean, you guys, what about this dark ass crazy stuff that is the actual reality if you learn all of it and not just what you want to see? It's quite different. Now, bearing all that in mind, and I think it's really important to enter this with full awareness, right? So that way, that just because the medicine informs you of something, for example, doesn't necessarily mean that it's correct. Caveat, though, all of the advice that I have ever gotten from ayahuasca, all of the precognitive information that I've ever gotten from ayahuasca has all served me. Never once has a DMT entity or ayahuasca told me to do anything harmful to myself or anyone else, and all of the insights have served me well. So I really do believe that even though we see these dark things in the past of ayahuasca, most of it is circumstantial. It is what best suited that culture in that time and place. So I don't really think it's an evil portent or anything. Having said that, though, the ego inflation is something that happens very often. Everyone's aware that there are shamans that use their office of respect and prestige and authority to manipulate people. In fact, just to be clear, I'm in no way complaining because this is a beautiful thing. But today, for example, I got a message from someone that said, "I miss you, man. I met them once, for a few days." But the role that we play as shamans, facilitators, guides, whatever you want to call it, is so impactful on people that, that's the kind of responsibility and relationship that you end up with. And it's really easy, I think, for a lot of people to be tempted into exploiting that, It's a very slippery slope, and it takes a tremendous amount of awareness to navigate that kind of responsibility well. And of course, I'm not making excuses for those people that fall into that trap. I'm just giving context to why it happens, And I think that the commercialization of it makes it so that some of these people have hundreds of people, thousands even, that have that perception of them. And that's, something like the kind of pressure that a celebrity has to deal with and not become an egomaniac. But it's way more dangerous, right? So, it's worthy of noting that this sort of perception that you will hear a lot of people take the position that, ayahuasca will punish you if you're not chaste and good, and there are plenty of people out there totally capable of working with it in dark ways, and that nothing happens to them. So keep the woo out. Keep all the woo out of your mind. And I'm going to give one example of an extreme ego inflation that I witnessed that was apparently precipitated by ayahuasca, right? This guy had given out some pamphlets about something about becoming a sovereign citizen in California, and it sounded good. It was like on my windshield when I got back. I just arrived looking to network. So my then wife and I headed down there, and there's this guy in like a white robe, and immediately I'm like, uh-oh, And he's got some hippie girls with him that I eventually figured out he had like seduced into flying him to their rich parents and flew him up there and thought he was this amazing like prophet or whatever. And I started to catch on right away, and I was like, something he said, I was like, if that's true, then you're the most perfect person that's ever existed. And he said, I would not dispute that. He was dead serious. And I was like, what? And then I looked at his, the girls, and I realized that they were on board with this. And then he tried to charge us $1,000 for these papers that supposedly would allow us to run stop signs and not get tickets and all this stuff. And he starts saying, when I'm out there on ayahuasca and I'm all, and I'm like, so what is happening though? Like, what exactly is it? Can you communicate to me what this, and like, what is the power? Like, articulate it. What are these insights? Stares at me blankly. And so I say to him as I'm leaving, and all of his people, this guy is completely out of his mind and ego inflated, and you're all eating his shit up. I got a message from somebody that was there a few days later, and they said, remember what you said about that guy, about the people eating his shit up? He literally put shit in their soup the next night and fed it to them. So that's what I'm getting at here. It's not always assured that these medicines are going to assist you. Overwhelmingly, obviously, positive. And the thing is that having experienced an ego inflation of a much smaller magnitude when I was a lot younger, going through certain processes where it's almost inevitable, I would say, sometimes it's necessary, and I think that it's even possible that even what the medicine did to that kid, if he made it through to the other side, it was a necessary part of his process or it wouldn't have happened. Long story really, really short. Ayahuasca is primarily, the fundamental application of it now in the modern era. In the past, it was masculine. It was about using remote viewing to figure out where the other tribes are coming from that are going to attack. It was used to, for example, if someone was bitten by a snake, the shaman would drink the ayahuasca and then look around the jungle, and the plant that he needed to cure this particular species of snake bite would turn into the head of a snake, and then he would know. Actually, though, oftentimes the plant that you need already looks like that species of snake. I have a short somewhere you guys can find where I show this plant, I don't know what it's called, that the skin looks like Dos Equis skin and the leaves look like snake heads hanging. And that's what's the primary plant in the mixture the Shuar and Quichua use to treat snake bite. And they say that if you are bitten and it takes 30, 45 minutes to get to the hospital, if you live, you're gonna lose that limb like 90% of the time, unless the Shuar treat you with this snakebite treatment, and then you won't lose the limb. But they won't tell us what the other plants, they're very secretive about these things. So yeah, it was used for that sort of application, for getting information. And now it's used for healing emotions, because it's just that sort of adaptogen, the world's most cosmic adaptogen. So, Huachuma, on the other hand, and this is infinitely interesting to me, that, everything contains its contradiction, but even things that are external and have relationships you can find these yin-yang sort of congruencies or something, you know. And San Pedro is masculine and it is light. And it's really difficult to explain exactly what that means. But even some of the common names for San Pedro, Peruvian torch, it implies light, right? It looks phallic. It grows in the desert, you know, often at high altitudes. And there's a vision that is almost, it's not that it happens at 100% of the time, but more often than not, at a certain dose, the same vision occurs. And I discovered this because it happened to me. And unfortunately, it always happens right at the line where you're gonna black out. And I don't think it's the mescaline in the cactus that causes these blackouts. There are a lot of other alkaloids, and I'm curious to see if maybe the Peruvian torch is not going to have as much of that alkaloid and won't cause this, because I've always worked with the Ecuadorian cactus. But at any rate, it's right on this line, and the blackouts are quite common, you know, if you take high doses. That's why when you guys go to retreats and you go to see San Pedro shaman, even the really good ones, right? Like a guy I know in Vilcabamba that's widely considered one of the best. He sat beside me on a van one time, and he literally told me I served them tourist medicine. I'm not trying to roll around on the ground getting vomited on by some, you know, traumatized gringo for 18 hours until the cactus wears off. I've done that, you know, I know what it's like. You know, so that's why it has a reputation for being weaker than ayahuasca. It's just dosage. Totally different, but it's just dosage, trust me. So this vision that I'm talking about, and it really does elucidate the whole nature of this cactus, this very information-based, you know, it's just constant bombardment, very rapid thoughts. And the visions, as opposed to ayahuasca, they're macro, you know, they're big pictures. San Pedro tends to be these infinitely tiny little dots and particles and just like a big mass of like pixels or something almost, but they're super, super small. And the bigger the dose, the smaller you can see the little pixels until you're staring at what I recognize to be photons. And there was a sea of like 800 trillion of them. I mean, it was absurd, you know, there's no way that any computer or my vision, you know, my physical eyes could not possibly perceive anything like this. And at one point I realized that I could zoom in on one of these photons and draw them closer so I could actually see the details, and I realized it was actually a tesseract, which is a shape that has a dimension in time, so you can't see the whole thing. It's not that it isn't there, it's just that you can only see the part of it that is in the same juncture of, you know, temporal juncture with you. And so the cactus said, you know, each one of these represents a little point of consciousness, like a monad from Leibniz. He had that right. And so watch this. And it just extinguished one of those little dots, and I ceased to exist. It's not like everything turned black. It's not like it was clear. I was just gone. And then I was back. And it was absolutely horrifying. And once I regained my composure, I was like, so what are you trying to tell me? I asked the cactus. And, you know, honestly, I don't really think, personally for me, they're not plant spirits. They are a spectrum of the field of consciousness, and the chemical deactivates part of the filtration system. And so in the case of San Pedro, I feel like it's the light itself. Like we're having a conversation with consciousness, you know, like the source really, the masculine aspect of it. Not as doubtful as it is with ayahuasca, who I find to be more androgynous than feminine, multi-purpose. So where was I at with this tale? So I said, okay, so grandfather cactus, what in the hell are you trying to show me here exactly? Like, is this all just a bunch of random chaos? Like, what is the point? And it would be difficult for me to actually articulate the literal explanation that I got, but it was something to the effect of like, no, I'm trying to show you how, perfect and sophisticated and intricate this is, that if one of these little points of light did not exist or was some other way than it was, the whole universe would cease to exist. Every single constituent element of it is exactly the way it has to be in order to sustain creation. And so, it's like, that's amazing. And I guess shortly after that, I kind of regained my mind because I had been in and out of awareness between these visions and stuff. It was really difficult, not difficult in the sense of being like, like I wasn't freaking out, but it was difficult to maintain continuity of awareness. And so a couple weeks later, I had a neighbor who was a Syrian refugee. And he said he was interested in the cactus, but he didn't want me to be there. And I didn't like it, but I was right next door. So I thought, well, I can come check on him. It's not that much anyways. And, and he had experience with other psychedelics and stuff. So I thought, well, all right, I'll leave you this little, it was just a little bit in the bottom of a bottle. But I make it really strong. So I went home and I just had a feeling, I didn't get any, I told him, text me, I'm right next door. If it gets weird at all, just text me and I'll be right back. So about 4 hours, I thought, you know what, I should probably go over there and check on this kid. And I get over there, and he is sitting on his loft, and he's okay, but he's definitely out of his head, and so is his girlfriend, and he's just babbling. He looks at me and looks me dead in the eyes, and he's like, the billions and trillions and trillions and billions and billions and trillions. It's just these little light particles, and I knew exactly what he was looking at, And then the San Pedro shaman that happened to find him before I did, apparently stark naked and raving in the bushes with his girlfriend, he brought him up and kind of gave him some rape and kind of put him a little bit back together. And he looked at me and he's like, man, well, medicine was a bit strong, wasn't it? And I was like, yeah, I know, I didn't want to do it, but I told him I'm right there. He wanted to be alone, so I let him, and so it was a gentle chastising because there was no really any harm done. And then he looks at the kid and he hears the babbling about the billions and the trillions, and he goes, it's the conversation with the light he's having. And so that was like, this was early on in my experiences with all this stuff. So I realized this experience of having this dialogue with the light is like ubiquitous for people when you take a large concentration or dosage of San Pedro. And so to get to the point of this, the way that it contrasts with ayahuasca is that it tends to integrate your intellectual capacities, right? One of the most extraordinary things I've experienced that it does is it gives you the ability to multitask, which actually studies have shown makes you stupid. It lowers your IQ to do it, but not with San Pedro. So I took a moderate, what I thought was a moderate dose before a gig. I was playing solo with backing tracks at this place in Ecuador, and I was playing, and suddenly I noticed that I had like 8 windows of consciousness, and one of them was entirely on my strumming hands, so I could do anything. I could strum whatever pattern, improvise anything with it, but also my full concentration was on my vibrato, and I had better control of it than normal. And I had equal focus on both things. And then I realized that I also had equal focus on my fingering hand, so I could improvise whatever while I'm, thinking about my breath control. I could also focus completely, but all of these things simultaneously in all these different windows with equal focus. There's actually a video from that show. If you don't believe me, you can tell by listening to it. Somebody hollered out a song that I didn't even know by Jimi Hendrix, and it sounded a lot like him, and I was not really even that familiar with it. I think it's on my Facebook page somewhere, or probably on YouTube. What the hell's the name of it? Damn, I don't know. If you look through my music videos, go way back to the beginning, and it'll, it's like Red House or something. So anyways, that sort of thing is tremendously useful for all kinds of different applications. And it also, I've met a lot of people that are way smarter than they think they are, from different types of self-esteem damage and just whatever. And so they have these intellectual blocks, and you can see them demonstrating a tremendous capacity for a certain type of intelligence, but it's like not bridged with other aspects of their intellect. And San Pedro can help fix that. Also, if you have daddy issues, if you're a woman and you have daddy issues, San Pedro is going to be able to help you with that infinitely more than ayahuasca. I would drink ayahuasca to deal with the mother, and San Pedro to deal with the father, the grandfather, a lot of the ancestral stuff from the masculine side of the lineage. And also just various aspects of our emotional being that are more associated with thought and masculinity. So if you have a lot of fear, depending on the source and the initial influence that created the fear, San Pedro may be a better ally. And then also, it does have purely medical applications that I shouldn't have said that word because YouTube has gotten mad at me for doing that before. But alleged medical applications. This was really interesting for me because I had read about this before I ran into this kid. And he had asthma, like dangerously bad asthma. But he was also kind of like a refugee. I don't know if street kid maybe gives the wrong impression, because he certainly wasn't rough and tumble or nasty or anything. But didn't have any money and kind of a hippie. And so he was at Amanita, which is a big party town, and he lost his inhaler. And so he went to the pharmacy and he tried to buy it, but he was short 50 cents or something, and they were just gonna let him die, it sounds, which is weird for Ecuador. So he tried to give them his guitar as collateral. They wouldn't do anything for him. Some guy walks up and he's like, "What's wrong with you, man?" And he's like, "Asthma." And he's like, "Come with me." And there was a San Pedro ceremony down on the beach, and he said they handed him the cup of San Pedro, he drank it down, never had another asthma attack for the rest of his life. So the shamans, he didn't know this. That was just his experience, but he's telling me this, and I've heard, shamans say we use it for asthma, diabetes, like all these things. So it definitely, the fact that I had heard that so much, and then this kid told me that story really justifies, and, having some faith in that, certainly not proof, but again, measuring my words pretty carefully. There's a lot of that. I have seen things cured that modern medical science claims there is no cure for. And we all know why they do that. But here's the thing, and this is something that we really need to kind of be loud about, I think. They've had ethnobotanists, Big Pharma has had ethnobotanists down here spying, working with, Terrence McKenna, really, if he had maintained his trajectory and used his degree, he would have been coming down to South America to figure out what plants indigenous people are using to cure things so that the Big Pharma can make a patentable version of it, right? My point is, it's not like Bayer doesn't know that ajo sacha can actually successfully treat epilepsy. So, and there is a case that I'm speaking about. There's a video where the individual talks about his experience on my channel. Can ayahuasca cure epilepsy? And to be fair, it wasn't just ayahuasca, ajo sacha. But in this particular case, in case you guys are unaware, he had 2 seizures when he landed in Ecuador while still on the pharmaceutical medication, right? He did not tell me that he was going to do this, but because I don't know how I would have felt about it. But he discontinued his medication, which is supposed to cause increased seizures as a side effect. And as soon as he started drinking the ayahuasca and the uña de gato and the other plants, his seizures stopped, and 9 months later, they had not returned. Without any plant support, after returning to the United States. Unfortunately, though, I told him the one thing you cannot do, because he had drug problems, the one thing you cannot do is smoke meth, or it will return. He smoked meth, and the seizures came back within seconds. So always listen to your facilitator. What's up, extra trip Ryle? Yeah, all is pretty well. Autoimmune disease are trauma-based and can be healed like asthma, allergies, cancer. Any body imbalance is based on disruptions on the energy body because of trauma. I agree with that statement mostly, but I don't think all illness and disease is necessarily caused by trauma. But in the case of something like autoimmune, where there isn't really a discernible cause, like a direct thing that we can say, look, there it is, the fucking virus that causes, this. And in fact, when I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, the doctor said syndrome basically means that we don't know what it is and don't know how to treat it. And it is true that although ayahuasca has not quite cured me permanently, the more I drink ayahuasca at any given period, the less symptoms I have. It's actually kind of alarming that, honestly, to be perfectly frank and transparent, I don't know why I don't drink it more often. It gets a little bit, tiring, and I think also that because I do events that last for a month, after I go through a whole event where it's almost every day with some plant medicine for, sometimes they're 2 months in a row, so it's 8 weeks. I just don't really want to, I need a break. But it is true that that the ayahuasca does sometimes cause complete remission that can last for weeks or months. Even smoking DMT one time, actually one of the most convincing occult type experiences that I ever had. I purchased my first gram of DMT at a Tool concert, of course, and it didn't happen the first time I smoked it because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know you had to take 3 big hits. I didn't use the internet back then in 2011, and DMT was still kind of a legendary thing that you heard about, but no one had ever actually seen. And so after I got it home, well, first I should mention that my roommate had found this thing called the Gematria calculator. And Gematria is an ancient Hebrew science, I guess, pseudoscience, art, maybe a better word, where because each of the Hebrew characters is also a number, you can add phrases together and then use the numerical values to make connections between things and have revelations and whatnot. And it's weirder than you would think, but it's also one of those rabbit holes that people go down and just lose their shit, and it just end up coming unhinged, and it's just be aware of it, but I wouldn't spend too much time on it. But anyways, he found this calculator, and a couple of the phrases that we put in had yielded some weird stuff. So I went out in the living room, and I smoked a ton of DMT. It was a huge pile just on some weed, and it wasn't 3 hits. I just torqued it and torqued it and torqued it and torqued it. And next thing I knew, I was rising through the plains, which is a term from an occult ritual, I guess. It's hard to describe. It's sort of like shifting through different dimensions almost. And when I came out at the top, it was like nirvana. And I realized this is the classical nirvana state. It was nothingness. It was totally just clear. I had no sense of time. There was no thought. There was nothing beyond words, And then as soon as I thought something, I, of course, plummeted back down because that's what happens. And I came back into my body, and I instantly noticed that all my chronic fatigue syndrome symptoms were gone. So for some reason, I thought, you know what? I should go check the Gematria calculator. So I go back to my roommate's room because it was the only computer in the house, if you can believe that. And I typed in N-dimethyltryptamine, and the only phrase that came back in the database with the same numerical value was cure for chronic fatigue syndrome. The chances of that have got to be astronomically fucking small that was a coincidence. So I appreciate you, extra real. I also, by the way, we're having events, and they are there's plenty of interest. So August and September now, for sure. August 8th, we're starting the first one, and September 1st. And we are in the Sacred Valley, and we are going to go to ruins and drink San Pedro, and we are going to use coca and rape, and I'm going to invite, I'm not 100% that this is going to happen, but like 99% sure. There is a Huni Kuni family that are rape masters, and I'm going to invite them to do a class, at least for one day, so you'll at least get the fundamentals of this process. It's a very rare opportunity, by the way. They're generally very secretive about these recipes and stuff. And then we'll have ayahuasca a few times a week, and Yopo, and then all sorts of superfood. I almost can't remember the word in English. Augmentations. So it's going to be amazing. Email me if you are interested. And a perfect circle vocalist reminds me of Tool's lead vocalist. That must be a joke, because it is the same guy. I hope he knows that. Pussifer, I think I like maybe better than either of those other bands, at least a couple of the songs. When will you be back to the Amazon? Like to meet you there. When I'm done with these events, I'm going to take a trip to Manu. We're looking into a friend of mine going on some property there because it's the most pristine, holistic, like, you know, all the jaguars and giant anacondas and the macaws and all that shit are still abundant there. So that's where we want to go. That's where we want to be. And so, okay, did I talk about all these medicines yet, though? I'm looking for my own description so I can see if... Yeah, and so I can kind of summarize, because, you know, there are these festivities in town, the Quechua are going crazy out there. No one knows why, which is funny. No one I can find. So there are these posters that say, like, Senor... something crazy long, Tekacachawana Nakakatl, whatever, in, you know, Incan. And there's a picture of Jesus' face with the thorns, but it says Senor something long in Incan, in Quechua. And so I've been going around to the locals and stuff, like, what is the reason for the celebration? And they're like, oh, it's a fiesta. And I'm like, okay, but ¿qué es la razón? Like, what? ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué? And they're like, you want a beer? You know, would you like some coca? But ¿por qué? ¿Por qué esta fiesta? Nobody knows, apparently. It's all month. It's from like April 27th until June 2nd or something. And I went down to the local club last night, and I'm asking everyone, you know, the brewmaster, the waiters, everyone, what the hell's going on? No one knows. Nobody knows why we're having this. Yeah, I saw that the aurora borealis was visible in many places because the sun is hyperactive. Do you think this affects also San Pedro trips? Holy shit, man. If I had been aware of this, before you mentioned it, I would have probably drank San Pedro yesterday. I'm going to check and see if is the solar activity supposed to continue like this? Because if so, then yeah, this would be an ideal time to drink San Pedro. In fact, I was supposed to do it today. And we ended up getting thrown off course by business stuff that I had to address. Man, that's crazy. I was planning, is it Saturday? Yeah, I was planning to drink San Pedro today. And then we got knocked off course. Damn it. Gracias, Fernando. I mean, I've been here 6 years. I noticed the other day I was down at the bar and I was speaking Spanish really rapidly. And I was like, holy crap, gringo, what happened? My son, too, I was really surprised. Because he doesn't, I asked him, has your Spanish gotten any better? And he's like, no, I don't think so. And I walked out of a store and he was talking to this little Peruvian kid and he was, I was like, what the fuck, man? Really? Why didn't you tell me you could do that? Shit, man. I have to go to the Huni Kuni's house and do rape tomorrow. I can't. Man, I can't believe we had a San Pedro ceremony planned for this overactive solar day, and it got... Anyways, guys, I didn't talk much about psilocybin, and there's not really much reason to, except that, it's kind of a the way I see mushrooms. They're almost like they have a little bit of the characteristics of all the other compounds. The feeling of being in contact with some sort of alien intelligence is a little bit more abstract, I think, and mild. The neurogenesis and neuroplasticity is enhanced a lot, and they can be highly therapeutic, but they're nowhere near as effective for repatterning habits and whatnot as LSD. They are one of the most useful of all psychedelics for people that don't get the tremendous body load. For me, taking mushrooms is a bit of roulette because about 1/3 of the time I get this like mushroom flu that completely destroys me physically. It's one of the most horrible things I've ever experienced in my life. And so, I'm a little bit less inclined. But I know that, when that doesn't happen, the feeling of lightness and joy that supports the experience can really facilitate in-depth work without maybe the level of exposure to difficulties that you might experience with high doses of LSD or ayahuasca. So I didn't talk too much about ketamine or MDMA, and that's a very, very simple thing to say for those compounds. In fact, in my Patreon the other day, someone made an excellent case for why dissociatives can actually be powerful medicine. And a lot of people hear ketamine and they think, that it's this like terrible drug of abuse that is unnatural, that actually, is found in a fungus, so it does exist in nature. And one of the best stories that I've ever heard in regards to its healing efficacy. There was a girl that a friend of mine knew who injected a very high dose of ketamine, and she was catapulted into a clear space, she said. And there were these puzzle pieces scattered everywhere, and she just knew that if she assembled them, it was her fragmented psyche, and if she assembled them again, she would never have another anxiety attack. And her anxiety attacks had been like every 30 minutes and crippling and lasting for 15 minutes. So her life was destroyed. She had PTSD that was like, she might as well have been in bed with some terminal cancer or something. I mean, she had no life, and it stopped. So, the people that make the argument that, you only should use natural substances and blah, 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 they're just hippies, don't listen to them. Ketamine definitely can do things that ayahuasca cannot do, that mushrooms cannot do, that LSD cannot do, MDMA as well. MDMA has a couple of therapeutic applications that none of the other psychedelics can come close to. and that is for healing relationships in MDMA therapy for couples. The success rate for them being together 5 years later is 85% higher than the same therapy without MDMA. That's a big fucking number. And it's been confirmed in several studies. So if you are one of those people that think MDMA is some, junk that ravers take, no. It's the user, not the tool. And if you are one of those people that is of the opinion that you should never take anything that isn't completely natural, then you can take MDA, sassafras, and it's just not as effective. The natural version is nowhere near as effective as MDMA is. Thank you, Sasha Shulgin, for your amazing contributions to this earth. You are sorely missed. So personally, what I like to do is combine about 50-50 MDMA and MDA, and that makes, because the MDA is a little bit more psychedelic, and it doesn't really have quite as much empathy producing effect. It doesn't enhance sensations quite like MDMA does. So I find that if you combine them, some of the tweakiness of MDMA is minimized, and the empathogen aspect is amplified in the MDA. So let's see. So do we cover just about everything? And then, we also have the fact that a lot of things that aren't actually psychedelics kind of get lumped into the same group, like the disassociatives. What's that awful mushroom from Siberia? Flagaric, Amanita muscaria. Personally, I would never take it. I've heard a lot of people have had, positive experiences and that there are therapeutic applications for it. But just be warned that if you choose to experience that particular medicine, it's a good idea to take it outside and string it up in the sun. And I can't remember whether it's the muscimol converts to ibutenic acid or ibutenic acid converts to muscimol. Who cares, really? Just put it out in the sun, let it dry, and it'll be much less toxic and far more hallucinogenic. I don't want to say psychedelic because it's a different thing. And, you're playing with fire to an extent because it can cause, what is it called, repetitive muscle syndrome, I think, where you get stuck in a loop. But whereas with LSD, I've gotten stuck in the same loop a few times in my life where I'm like, time, the pyramids, money, the Nazis, Hitler, just like going through all of history and like all of the significant stuff that, and like it's just like this loop that can go for hours and hours and hours. And it's happened to me twice in my life. So it's that, but it's physical. And so Paul Stamets, I think, is it Paul Stamets or the other? It doesn't matter. It might have been Weir, or who's that? Dr. Andrew Weir, I think. Anyways, one of these mushroom guys, one of these holistic mushroom dudes, went to one of my favorite places on earth. And it's called Cougar Hot Springs in Eugene, Oregon, near Eugene, Oregon. It's an amazing place in the redwoods. There's like a black rock that almost looks like onyx with the water shooting out. It's full of lithium, and then it goes down into different pools, so you can choose your temperature, and it's clothing optional. And so he went there, and there's a redwood tree that is across the trail, and I think you have to walk over it. And this guy was jumping off of it and like smashing his ankles, and I think he might have broken a few things, but he couldn't stop doing it anyways. He would just drag himself back up to the tree. And then I think it was Andrew Weil that had that story. And then, that's what it is. Stamets experienced it himself. He ate some panther caps, and he just kept dropping his camera, picking it up, dropping his camera, picking it up, dropping his camera. And a big group of tourists came and stood around, and so the camera was destroyed. And he was acting super weird and could have gotten probably arrested or something. So, when you venture outside of the territory of indole ring psychedelics, phenethylamines and whatnot, it just increasingly gets weird and dangerous. And I do not see what the point is when you can get the same sort of effect without the toxicity and the risks. I sometimes use brumansia for inflammation and insomnia. But the toxicity is high enough that even at the doses that it's effective as an anti-inflammatory or for the prophetical dreams, and it's crazy. It is. I'm not going to say that it's worth it to any of you out there because it can be dangerous. But I know what I'm doing. And so, I'm not giving you any information, no advice, nothing, because I don't want to be responsible for anybody out there thinking that they can just test this. But in terms of the prophetical dreams, it really seems to work. And the crazy part about it, and one of the reasons that it's not just the toxicity that makes Datura and Brumansia so dangerous, it's actually the fact that you cannot distinguish it from real life. I'm really lucky. The one night that I actually drank a little bit more than I had intended to because I was dealing with a Peruvian strain, and I knew that it could be stronger. I figured it was. It looked stronger. It smelled stronger, But I cut my dose down, and it still was stronger. So I was like right on the line where luckily I stayed in bed and didn't like wander outside or something. But I could not distinguish between whether I was sleeping and I had just woken up, and there was really actually change in my bed. And I was picking it up and it was falling through my hands, and I kind of knew that wasn't right, but everything still looked totally real. Then I went to the bathroom and peed, and I saw that in the morning, so I realized I'd actually done that, and it wasn't a dream exactly. And my partner wasn't there at the time, and she was there suddenly helping me pick the money up, and it would still kind of fall through my hands, but she looked as real as she would if she walked in the room right now. Yeah, so that's, dangerous because you don't know, you cannot distinguish between, it's a true hallucination. It's not like DMT where it's like weird aliens that you're like, that's not real. It looks pretty solid, but it's not real. Brumansia and Datura, you can't distinguish. Interesting fact about Datura, zombies are real, and they are created in Haiti using Datura, and it's probably Datura metalloides, and pufferfish venom, and several other things. And so the witch doctor will choose a victim, and they have two different types of zombies, the sex slave zombie and the plantation worker zombie, basically. And depending on the dose that's given, the person will fall asleep to the extent that they appear to be dead. The heart is beating, but it's barely registerable. There's no discernible breath, so they'll be declared dead and buried. And then, depending on how long the witch doctor waits to give the antidote, the person will have different degrees of brain damage. So, at 3 days, you would have a viable sex slave. And if you want a much more brain dead person just for, labor, then up to 10 days, I think, before they're resuscitated. There is a book by Wade Davis, who was a student of Robert Evans Schultes, the Harvard ethnobotanist that really brought our attention to ayahuasca in the first place. He was sort of like a psychedelic Indiana Jones, even though, interestingly, he did not get visions from ayahuasca, only lines, he said. And regardless of the fact that they didn't really affect him very deeply, he still devoted his life to going to Peru and running around in the jungle trying to find different stuff. There's a book called One River by Wade Davis that had a lot to do with shaping my entire life, I think. Definitely also worth a read. Goes through everything from the narco-traficantes and the coca and the cocaine-making processes to ayahuasca and the watoto and the shuar and ashwar and all of their medicines. He discovered the tiniest orchid in the world, the blue orchid. He also found a plateau somewhere in Peru where 90% or 98.2%, almost everything contains some sort of psychedelic drug. So really interesting guy. But anyways, Wade Davis was a student of Richard Evans Schultes, and he heard about the zombie phenomenon, went down and discovered that it's actually a real thing. Another interesting fact about Datura, This is actually kind of a little bit creepy as well. The root is made into a flying ointment that was used by witches in the, I don't know what, the Dark Ages or whatever, a hella long time ago in England or whatever, Europe. And so basically you cook it down to a paste. And one of their rituals involved applying the flying ointment through the vaginal walls with a broom handle. Witches on a broom handle? That's where that image comes from. That is the actual origin story of the witch riding a broom handle and flying around. Sure, of course I'm down to collaborate on some music in the future. How do you know if you cook the San Pedro right for a good mescaline trip? Follow my instructions. I don't know. I mean, if you extract it for 3 hours of the pulp 3 times and then cook that down to where it's dark and it tastes like absolutely the worst goddamn thing you've ever put in your mouth, you probably have done it correctly. The biggest problem that people have is buying PC Pacanoy, and it doesn't contain much mescaline. So that... Oh, well, before I go, let me talk a little bit about the effect of Huilca, because you should be warned. It is interesting. It's kind of like ayahuasca, but only for an hour. So it's actually something that I suggest to people if you're considering ayahuasca, especially deliberately taking a large dose of it. You might want to try Wilka first because it'll at least give you an idea of what you're getting into, and the chances of being shocked and taken off guard and having some sort of negative response are greatly diminished. To be forewarned is to be forearmed. So only an hour, obviously, is much easier to navigate than 4 to 6 hours. So it requires about a ½ gram to be blown into the nose or just insufflated. You can just snort it like it's kind of ghetto. It's definitely much more, you feel more distinguished to do it the traditional way. So I recommend that. And it's a lot of stuff to have in your nose, and it's snail shells. I mean, they're burnt to ash, but it's ashes from snail shells and wood, basically ground up wood, blasted into your nose at a pretty high velocity. And luckily, if your facilitator happens to be not a Brazilian indigenous person, they'll be more gentle. But if you were actually to go out into the deep jungle, you see the pictures of these guys, and there's a cloud of dust around the recipient's head. And I don't know if you probably can imagine how much force it would take to generate a cloud like that. So, yeah, anyways, within about a minute, you'll notice that you've really done it this time. I was a bit worried that I had broken my brain. I found the seeds for the first time in a park in Ecuador, and I realized, immediately what I was looking at, and they were all over the ground, and I was like, what, really? So I thought it was Yopo, but it's Wilka. And similar, but I guess we'll see. I'm going to try Yopo Monday, probably. So within a minute, swirling, pulsing, orange and yellow, and then this is the same for just about everyone. Orange and yellow, like a ball in the center, and it's like swirling, pulsing faster, and then suddenly it blows up just about the time that you're sure you're going to die. Vasoconstriction is really intense, so your blood vessels are closing up, and you are feeling like you're going to pop because the blood is trying to force its way through these really narrow vestibules, and it's having quite a bit of difficulty. So you have pressure in your head, and you feel like you're going to throw up. You might throw up. For some reason, people puke into their hands a lot when they do Wilka. I don't know what that's about. It's not just one person. It happens all the time. I have to run around and slap their hands apart, and usually it doesn't work. They put them back together until they vomit in their hands. People don't do that when they drink San Pedro and vomit or ayahuasca. Only with Wilka, they puke in their hands. I have no clue what that's about. But then after the pulsing orange and yellows dissipate, there's oftentimes this sort of wall of these purple tentacled beings that seem to be a hive mind, but they also have their own individual awareness. I've experienced that, and I know a number of other people that have experienced these particular beings. Sometimes the tentacles will kind of come out and connect with you, and you'll get some sort of information through that experience. And then another really interesting thing that I have observed with wilka is actually interspecies telepathy. And I know that sounds like a bit much, but my partner used to have this cat that was not friendly, really. I mean, you could pet it sometimes, but you couldn't really pick it up. It would run away right away. And we had taken a significant dose of wilka, and we were sitting on the bed at her parents', and she looks at me and she goes, I can communicate with the cat. And I was like, oh shit, we've broken our brains. And she says this, and the cat is across the room, and it starts meowing, and it runs across the room, gets right in her face, and they're like making all these mewing sounds back and forth, nose to nose, and I'm completely baffled. And then the cat and her both kind of fall over and start bawling. Like the cat's rubbing its face in the blanket and like obviously really distressed, and Rika's crying, and I'm looking at this pile of like absurdity. And then the next day I go out to walk through my neighbor's yard, and Mufwufu, the guy's name, R.I.P. Mufwufu, he walks up to me, and without even saying good morning or how are you doing or anything, he just says, do you think maybe consciousness is a unified field and sometimes we could have telepathic communication with a cat? This is like 10 hours after I'd seen my partner say, I can communicate with the cat. And then next thing you know, they're nose to nose and mewing at each other. I mean, so I guess the summary of all of this, and the important thing to take away really, is that, I got to assume that if you are watching the stream, at least some of you are not, you're still looking for information. And one of the most important things I think to consider is that they change your consciousness. They change the parameters of your experience. And I think there are a lot of people out there that think they have damaged themselves because they start experiencing synchronicities. They're seeing a little film of patterns in the air around them, and they think that they have gotten stuck in a trip permanently. And people have said for decades that you never really actually come down from an LSD trip. And what they mean is that every time you deactivate part of this filter, it doesn't come back to an extent. It's not necessarily a bad thing if you are supporting that process with practices and disciplines that facilitate having the clarity and wisdom and knowledge to navigate this new psychological space, right? It's a new world. You will experience telepathy. You will experience coincidences that are on a level that are enough to make a muggle go crazy, or to think that they're insane. So, that is one of the fundamental things I think to consider, that sort of allegory in the Matrix where he's like red pill or blue pill, it's really true. Psychedelics are not just a therapeutic tool. One of the things I didn't talk much about that I also want to make sure I get to is Big Pharma. Speaking of the transcendental experience and the importance of that, it is very, 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 very easy, and it has been done before. All of you, I'm sure, have heard of MK Ultra. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's one of the times we have caught them with their pants down, more so than like anything else. More than the JFK assassination, because we have the documents and the proof. Charles Manson, for example, was visited multiple times before the murders over many years by the same MK Ultra scientist while he was in jail as a young person. So he was an experiment from, pretty early on in his life. That's a fact. They also kidnapped, and look, we got people dropping off as I'm talking about one of the most important aspects of it. I hate that, when things go too far for people and they think they know stuff, tune you out. But the CIA literally kidnapped this woman. She wasn't the only one, but she's the only one that snapped out of it. They kidnapped her, they took her to Canada, they gave her electroshock therapy, and there's a ceiling for LSD. So there's like a maximum dose where it just rinses, I guess, because your receptors are full and they can't take anymore, so it just rinses right out. I think it's 2,500 micrograms. It could be 5,000. I think it's 2,500. But so anyways, they gave this woman these, ceiling LSD doses with electroshock therapy because they realized they could completely wipe the slate clean. They could get rid of all of her memories, her personality, and then reprogram a new identity. And then they cut her loose in Canada with this new name, new identity. And one day she was pushing a grocery cart around in the store, and she was like, "This is not my beautiful house. This is not my..." Yeah, I always feel like I'm a lab experiment, science experiment in a lab, living in a memory. I mean, maybe, there's all kinds of possibilities. Just the other day, I experienced with my partner synchronicities on an order that were enough to, you feel like you're in an old episode of The Twilight Zone or something. And it's a little bit hard to believe that we could inhabit a universe with all of these extremely strict fundamental laws that are irreversible and immovable, and then somehow these things are able to slip through the cracks. So what was I talking about, though? It was important. Damn it. Oh, yeah. So this woman wakes up and she realizes what's happened, and she hires a lawyer. And Freedom of Information Act, they actually are able to confirm. CIA releases the shit. She finds out what happened to her, sues the U.S. government. And here's the thing. They were operating in Canada as well as the United States when they did this. So it was like international yikesiness, So a lot of people worry that the New World Order is coming. Coming? What are you talking about? It's been here a long time, man. MK Ultra is real as hell. LSD can be used as a weapon against us. I don't remember how we got trapped in this particular rabbit hole. I know I was going somewhere else with this probably. I think what I was getting at is just that it's the operator and not the tool that is, really fundamentally important here. And it is true that if you take the choice to make the plunge, you had better be prepared for your reality to, the parameters of what's available to your perception are going to move, they're going to expand, they're going to become wider. Your frequency sweep of your consciousness is going to be far more broad. And it's a lot more interesting, but there's oftentimes a sort of dissonance between the conditioned mind and the conditioned personality and this new spectrum of awareness. So I am going to check out now and go to town. Am I talking about Yopo? Well, I was talking about wilka, which is very similar to Yopo. Is Datura actually substance D from a scanner darkly? I don't think so. I think it was something more like super meth or something. I don't think it was supposed to be Datura. Is it possible to make grade A lab LSD 25, not LSA from Morning Glory? I don't understand the way you phrase that question. It is possible to make grade A lab LSD, but not from LSA from Morning Glory. Correct. I don't know if that's a question or... Okay, so by the way, you guys, I am demonetized, and that does not help me pay my bills. So I rely on you guys for support if you appreciate this content and would like to see me continue creating it. My next video is a recipe for coca powder, activated coca powder, lucuma superfruit, and maca pancakes. They were fluffy, delicious, and quite energizing and nutritious, particularly for flushing stuff physically, and because it's like lucuma is super high fiber, insoluble, and so it helps to move waste, and the coca flushes all sorts of bad things from the body. So it's sort of a double whammy there. At any rate, though, I appreciate your support. If you join the Patreon, you get access to 5 years of stuff that is not on the main channel. And if you would like to come to our event in August or September, email me. Email's in the description. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I will see you again. Well, the Forbidden Knowledge stream for patrons only is tomorrow, and then Monday at 8 o'clock we have our patron-only voice chat, which is always extraordinary because we have quite the collection of minds in our Patreon. So join us. You guys didn't even see the look. Check out my shirt. Lama Sutra. Oh man, I didn't realize no one could see that the whole time that I was streaming, really. Okay, yeah, so good night, y'all.